If God really loves the weak, then why does he let them suffer the most? The thought was a ghost that haunted Daniel, a 16-year-old boy whose world felt perpetually gray. He lived in a town that prided itself on its serene picket fence charm, where church bells chimed on Sundays and neighbors greeted each other with practiced smiles. But beneath the surface, it was a place of quiet cruelty, a small pond where the weakest fish were easy prey. Daniel's own life was a testament to this truth. His mother, a woman who had filled their small house with light and laughter, had been gone for 2 years, taken by an illness that had consumed her with relentless speed. Her absence left a void that his father, once a kind and jovial man, tried to fill with cheap whiskey. The bottles piled up like monuments to grief, turning his father into a shell of his former self, distant, angry, and unpredictable. This new reality made Daniel an easy target. At school, his worn-out clothes and the lingering smell of stale alcohol from his father's work uniform, which he sometimes had to borrow when his own were too dirty, were markers of his low status. He was an outcast, a pariah, and the self-appointed kings of the school hallways, led by a boy named Marcus, never missed an opportunity to remind him of it. Their mockery was a daily ritual. It started with whispered insults in the hallways, then escalated to sneers during lunch and thinly veiled taunts in the locker room. Marcus, with his perfect hair and smug grin, was the ringleader. "Look, it's Daniel, the kid from the broken home," he'd say loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I heard his dad drink so much he can't even stand up straight. No wonder his mom left." The words were like jagged stones thrown at his heart. They were lies, cruel and deliberate, but they cut deep because they touched on his greatest pain. The teachers, the supposed guardians of the school, were no help. Mr. Harrison, his history teacher, would often sigh and shake his head when Daniel struggled to stay awake. "If your father put as much effort into providing for his family as he does into the bottom of a bottle, maybe you wouldn't be so tired, Daniel." It was a casual jab, but it carried the weight of 1,000 judgments. Daniel learned to keep his head down, to become a ghost in the hallways, hoping that invisibility might offer some form of protection. He had tried to hold on to the faith his mother had instilled in him. He would sneak into the back pew of the town's old stone church, clutching the worn Bible she had left him. But with each act of bullying, with each shrug of indifference from the adults who were supposed to protect him, his faith began to fracture. The sermons about God's love and a shepherd's unwavering care for his flock felt like hollow words, mocking his reality. He would look at the stained glass image of Jesus, his hands open in a gesture of welcome, and feel nothing but a cold, empty despair. "He watches, but he doesn't act," Daniel would think. "He lets the strong win and the weak suffer, so where is his love?" One night, the rain lashed against his bedroom window, mimicking the storm inside his heart. His father was downstairs, the clinking of glass and the slurred sounds of a sad song, a familiar backdrop to his misery. Daniel lay on his bed, the weight of the day's humiliation pressing down on him. A fresh tear stained his pillow as he remembered the cruel laughter, the whispered insults about his mother's death. It was the final straw. He couldn't pretend any more. He stumbled out of bed and fell to his knees on the cold floor, his mother's Bible clutched tightly to his chest. The words came out as a desperate, broken whisper, a prayer born not of hope, but of a final, desperate plea. "If you are real, show me, because I can't take this any more." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing and the drumming of rain. He felt foolish, but a strange sense of surrender washed over him. He had nothing left to lose. This was his breaking point, his last stand. He didn't know it then, but this moment of utter despair was the turning point he had been unknowingly waiting for. The answer to his prayer didn't come in a flash of divine light or a booming voice from the heavens. It came instead in the form of a gentle, perceptive young woman named Naomi. She was the new teacher in charge of the church's youth music group, and she had an uncanny ability to see past the masks people wore. She'd seen Daniel sitting alone in the back, a silent observer of the youth group's noisy rehearsals, his face a mask of quiet sadness. One Tuesday, after everyone else had left, she approached him. "You have a good ear, Daniel," she said softly, her voice like a warm blanket. "You were humming along to the chorus, I could tell." Daniel was startled. No one had ever noticed him. He mumbled a quick denial, but she simply smiled. "You don't have to join, but you're always welcome here. And if you ever need to talk, I'm a good listener." Her words, so simple yet so genuine, were the first lifeline he had been offered in a long time. Over the next few weeks, she continued to be a quiet presence. She would leave him a fresh bottle of water after practice or a small snack. She would defend him with a simple, firm look when other teenagers tried to make a joke at his expense. For the first time, Daniel felt the fragile but undeniable feeling that someone, somewhere, was on his side. He began to feel a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the church's heating system. The tension, however, had to reach its inevitable breaking point. It happened on a bright, sunny Friday, a day that mocked the dark scene about to unfold. The school held its annual pep rally, and the bleachers were packed with a sea of students, their shouts and cheers a deafening wall of sound. Daniel, as always, was trying to make himself small, sitting on the highest, most secluded row. Marcus and his group spotted him, a predator's gleam in their eyes. They made their way up, their footsteps heavy with menace. Marcus held up a crumpled sheet of paper. "Hey, Daniel, look what I've found," he shouted, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It's a note from your dead mommy." A wave of cruel laughter rippled through the section of the bleachers. Daniel's blood ran cold. His mother's Bible was in his lap, the pages full of her handwritten notes. He clutched it protectively. Marcus's friend, Jake, a burly boy with a cruel streak, lunged and snatched it. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as he stood up, his face pale with shock and fury. "Give it back," he pleaded, his voice cracking. Marcus took the Bible from Jake. "This old thing? I thought it was a comic book. What are you, trying to talk to ghosts?" He laughed, a chilling, hollow sound. With a sudden, vicious rip, he tore the Bible's cover in half, and then, one by one, he began tearing out the pages, letting them flutter down like morbid confetti. Daniel's world narrowed to a pinpoint of pain. The handwritten notes, the underlined verses, the familiar scent of his mother's perfume, all of it was being shredded and desecrated. He felt a hot, blinding rage, followed by a crushing wave of despair. He saw the students around him, some laughing, some looking away uncomfortably, but no one intervening. He had had enough. He turned, ready to bolt, to run from all of it. But then a voice, calm and steady, cut through the chaos. "Stop right there." Marcus, it was Naomi. She had been standing nearby, her face a mixture of concern and righteous anger. She walked deliberately toward the group, her gaze unflinching. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She simply stood her ground, radiating a quiet authority. "This isn't a game," she said, her voice carrying the unmistakable weight of a teacher, but with a deeper sense of conviction. "What you're doing isn't funny. It's cruel, and it's a cowardly way to prove you're strong." Marcus sneered, his bravado wavering slightly. "Oh, look, the church lady is here to save the little runt. What are you gonna do? Pray for us?" Naomi's eyes locked onto his. "No, I'm going to tell you the truth. You don't get to define what strength is. True strength isn't about making someone else feel small. It's about standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. It's about compassion. It's about understanding that every person, including Daniel, has a story you know nothing about." Jake took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Leave him alone. He's a loser, just like his dad." At that moment, as Daniel braced for impact, a new voice rang out, one filled with shock and fury. "Jake, what on earth do you think you're doing?" The crowd parted, revealing the school principal, Mr. Thompson, standing with another man, his face white with rage. It was Marcus's father, a respected lawyer in the community, who had come to watch the rally. He had witnessed the entire ugly scene from a distance. The tables turned in an instant. The bullies were frozen, their bravado melting away under the weight of adult authority. The principal moved swiftly, ordering them to his office. But it was Marcus's father's face that held the most impact, a mixture of shame, disbelief, and a silent, furious disappointment. He barely looked at Daniel, but the look he gave his own son was a punishment in itself. The next few days were a whirlwind of apologies and consequences. The bullies were suspended, forced to do community service, and required to attend counseling. The school held an assembly not to punish, but to address the issue of bullying head-on. Without naming names, the principal spoke of the importance of kindness and the danger of prejudice. And then a small miracle happened. The ripped pages of Daniel's Bible were found scattered across the bleachers. The school's janitor, a quiet, kind man, had collected them all. He handed the tattered pages to Daniel, his eyes filled with silent sympathy. He had never spoken to Daniel before. But that small act of kindness was more profound than any grand speech. The community began to change, slowly, almost imperceptibly. A neighbor offered to give Daniel a ride to the church. The man who owned the local hardware store gave him a part-time job. The whispers didn't disappear, but they were no longer whispers of judgment. They were whispers of admiration for his resilience, for his quiet strength. On a Sunday a few weeks later, Daniel found himself back in the quiet, empty church. He knelt in the same spot where he had offered his prayer of desperation. This time, his hands weren't clenched in a tight, pleading grip. They were open, palms up, in a gesture of release and gratitude. Tears streamed down his face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of profound understanding. He realized the answer to his question was not a display of divine power, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human compassion. God hadn't stopped the suffering, but he had sent Naomi, a gentle guide in his time of despair. He had sent the principal and Marcus's father to see the truth. He had even sent the quiet janitor, a silent hand of compassion, to restore a part of what had been lost. Faith, he realized, wasn't a magic spell that made all pain disappear. It was the presence of light in the darkness, the helping hand that found you when you were on the brink of falling. Pain wasn't removed, but it was transformed into a conduit for connection, a reason for empathy, a reason for a community to come together. Daniel's journey didn't end with a simple resolution. His father's recovery was a long and difficult road, filled with its own setbacks. But Daniel was no longer alone. He had friends who saw him for who he was and a mentor in Naomi. He no longer felt like a ghost. He felt seen. He went on to become the very thing he had longed for, a protector. He would be the first to speak up when he saw someone being bullied, his quiet strength a shield for those who needed it. He would share his story not out of a desire for sympathy, but to remind others that they were not alone. The pain he had endured was not a sign of abandonment, but the very ground on which his faith had been able to blossom. It was through the darkest moments that he found the most profound truths, a realization that answered his first question not with an explanation, but with an experience. He learned that God's love for the weak isn't about removing their suffering, but about being present with them in the midst of it, and sending others to stand with them until the dawn.